Stephen Colbert is the most anti-Trump voice in late-night TV, and this week he told an outrageous joke that prompted calls for his firing.
You talk like a sign language gorilla who got hit in the head. In fact, the only thing your mouth is good for is being Vladimir Putin's holster.
Colbert responded to the storm of criticism by saying he had no regrets.
I have jokes. He has the launch codes. So, it's a fair fight. So while I would do it again, I would change a few words that were cruder than they needed to be.
Joining us now to talk about Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel, and the comedians skewering Trump. In New York, Marisa Guthrie, television editor for The Hollywood Reporter. And here in Washington, Carley Shimkus, a reporter for Fox News Headlines 24/7 on Sirius XM. Marisa, so Stephen Colbert has revived his ratings, dug himself out of last place by bashing President Trump. That ugly joke, in my view, was beneath him. Why couldn't he have just said, "I'm sorry, I went over the line"?
Well, he has said nothing is off limits when it comes to Trump. I think he knew what he was doing. I personally did not like that particular joke either, and I think some of the critics of it have a point. But he has raised his ratings and his buzz by doing exactly what he was doing, by bashing Trump. So he's not going to apologize for it.
Right. Well, Colbert is a talented guy, but I don't understand why he had to go into the gutter. And Carley, he actually has brought back his old Comedy Central character to continue dumping on Trump. Could he be alienating part of his audience, or are conservatives just not going to watch Colbert anyway and he's playing to his crowd?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. The Trump bashing here is off the charts. Quite literally. There was a recent study that found that the president has been the butt of more jokes during his first 100 days in office than the previous 3 presidents during their first year in office. And it used to not always be that way.
Comparable, but he certainly has been a big fat target in late night.
Absolutely, yeah. And it used to not always be that way. I mean, Letterman even said that Johnny Carson didn't like to talk about the Vietnam War during his show because he saw a distinction between late night TV and the evening news, and that distinction no longer exists, and it is alienating a whole lot of people.
And Marisa, with some activists throwing out the hashtag Fire Colbert, calling for an advertiser boycott, does that go too far? Is that not called for in this situation in your view?
Well, I mean, look, I think we're at a point in our history where, like, boycotts are called for every 5 minutes.
Right.
So I think they lose their impact when somebody's always objecting to something someone is saying somewhere. And Stephen Colbert is a late-night comedian. He's obviously an anti-Trump late-night comedian. Mm-hmm. The people who are saying he should be fired are not his fans.
Right.
So the people in his audience, the people watching his show, don't think there's anything wrong with the Trump bashing.
Right. Although I wonder how some of them would react if those kind of jokes had been told about Barack Obama.
Yeah.
I mean, but look, I'm not a fan of boycotts. Let people vote with their remote controls.
Right.
Now, also this week, Jimmy Kimmel had a very heartfelt moment. We're going to play a little bit of that for you. You've probably seen it because it's been so viral. But he also injected politics in it. Let's take a look.
Dr. Starnes opened his chest and fixed one of the 2 defects in his heart. He went in there with a scalpel and did some kind of magic that I couldn't even begin to explain. He opened the valve and the operation was a success. It was the longest 3 hours of my life. President Trump last month proposed a $6 billion cut in funding to the National Institute of Health. If your baby is going to die, and it doesn't have to, it shouldn't matter how much money you make.
So it must have been so traumatic to go through the possibility of losing your newborn baby.
Absolutely.
My heart goes out to Jimmy Kimmel, and I hesitate to criticize him. But then at the end, he brought in Trump budget cuts, kind of made a pitch for Obamacare. Should he have blended his personal trauma with politics?
You know, this moment with Kimmel was far less political to me than anything that Colbert is doing. The White House even responded and said that, yeah, they kind of agree with what Jimmy Kimmel is saying with, you know, the coverage of pre-existing conditions. So I would have to say that what Kimmel did, and I understand the criticism there, is far less egregious than the insult lobbing Colbert that.
Right. Marisa, you know, Kimmel is also a Trump critic. We saw that at the Oscars. And some critics of his are saying, well, you know, he's rich, he's an elitist, this sort of thing doesn't affect him, and why did he have to take this authentic moment and make it political? Your thoughts?
Well, I think he genuinely felt that he had an opportunity to say something. And he was saying this during the week when the House was passing their second version of the American Health Care Act, which, as he noted, has deep cuts for the National Institutes of Health. So I think that his grief and relief was genuine, but I also think that he genuinely is concerned about these things. And, you know, just because he makes a lot of money and doesn't have to worry about health care doesn't mean he can't have concern for the other people who don't.
That's a fair point. You know, by the way, for all the focus on the Colbert's sex joke, you know, Bill Maher the other night suggested basically incest between Donald and Ivanka Trump. It was just awful with a certain hand gesture, and it hasn't gotten as much attention, but I just wish none of them would go there. And so finally, Carly, Samantha Bee, John Oliver, Trevor Noah, Seth Meyers, virtually all the late-night comics except for Jimmy Fallon are now anti-Trump. What does that say about that part of the media world?
Well, it's almost as if you don't bash the president, you can't sit at the cool kids table at the Hollywood high school. And you're right, Fallon is actually getting a lot of criticism for not making fun of the president enough,
right,
which is very interesting. I mean, they're clearly trying to play towards young voters, young people who are, not very fond of the president, the millennials, but at the same time, like I said before, they're alienating a whole lot of other people.
Right. I mean, I'm all for comedy and comedians having leeway, but it does seem like you're right.
In the office of the presidency no longer.
Well, there is that. All right, Carley Shimkus, Marisa Guthrie.